Well, you make plans. We had a plan. As a matter of fact, producer Jonathan McPants just pointed out to me that perhaps one of the benefits, if that's the right word, of the news that broke over the night and into the morning about President Trump testing positive and Melania Trump testing positive is that I will no longer have to have a terrible, possibly relationship-ending fight with Lucy Gellman about the Beach Boys, because that would have happened if we had stuck to our original scheme that was going to include this list of the greatest albums of all time or something. I don't even remember our original scheme anymore. I do know that this is The Nose, and we are very excited to have with us today Lucy Gellman, editor of The Arts Paper and host of WNHH Radio's Kitchen Sink, and a person who has apparently never listened to Pet Sounds, and Mike Pesca, the host of Slate's daily podcast, The Gist. Mike Pesca is making his Nose debut today. I believe he has considerable radio and podcast experience, but this would be his Nose debut today. And we thought it would be fun, if Mike just joined in with one of the typical cultural conversations we like to have. And part of that was going to be, and I guess sort of still will be, this Showtime two-part drama called The Comey Rule, starring Jeff Bridges as James Comey and Brendan Gleeson as Donald Trump. That was sort of the plan. And then all this stuff happened. It would just be weird to try to get through this without dealing with what everybody's dealing with today. So that is exactly what we are going to do. But Lucy, Mike, welcome to The Nose.
Hi.
Yeah, there
I
you
still
are.
got a lot of I still got a lot of thoughts on Joni Mitchell. You don't want to hear them?
Could you work them into the rest of this somehow? Is there some way that you can incorporate Coyote into what's happening right now? So
yeah, I guess you don't know what you got till it's gone. And something's gone.
That was very good. Very quick. I like that. So, yeah, I just want to talk to both of you. And Mike, since you sort of have the floor already, I mean, it's also just worth talking about how a story like this kind of lands on us in this media environment. A lot of people were not up last night around 1:30 when this news started to break. I guess the networks were having late night specials about it. I didn't see any of them. I was like a lot of people. I did this strange thing that we all do when we get up now, which is to grab our phones. And then suddenly there's just not only this story, right, but this flood of spin and speculation. But I'd like to hear from each of you. Mike, just, in terms of how media told you about this, what happened?
It's so funny that you say how media told me, because actually NPR's media reporter, David Fogenflick, who's one of my best friends,
yes,
and I were texting at the time about, I don't know what, boom, he says, guess what? Hope Hicks has COVID. No way. So I switched off the Jet game, and I do experience it through cable news. And it's fascinating because NBC, Brian Williams has that 11 o'clock show. He's hanging around. So even though he's not Lester Holt and the main anchor, he confers all the authority of NBC News, and they go all hands on deck. CNN, same thing. Don Lemon is there. White House correspondents are there. They get Carl Bernstein in. They get Brian Stelter to tell us, don't forget, the president lies. So they have a full team. Over on Fox, they stick with their overnight anchor, who I looked up, a woman named Ashley Stimson, I think. Not a blue check mark on Twitter, no shade. She, her bio claims she was Miss Missouri 2010. I looked it up. It's true. But they only have phone guests. They don't really play it like this is the, earth-shattering news that it is. I can't quite understand how they reacted or why they underreacted. But
right.
that's
I think to be fair, at the end they had Adam Gase, the coach of the Jets, on to talk about it. But and he was in studio. So Lucy, how about you? I mean, how did you even learn about this thing? Ooh, Lucy might be muted. So we'll come back to her in just a second. Lucy, can you hear me? No, she can't. So, this, Mike, is, you referenced the idea of somebody saying, well, the president often is not truthful. And, that's the thing that really is still kind of sticking with me, is how many people I've just encountered on social media or in conversation today who just don't know whether they can safely put their foot on this rock in the middle of the river. There's just an awful lot of people who have various explanations about why this might be offered up untruthfully for other purposes.
Yeah, and whose fault is that? As a researcher named Peter Pomerantsev wrote, the title of his book, he goes inside Russia and he figures out how propaganda works. And the insight is the title. Nothing is true and everything is possible. So propaganda is not trying to convince you of this fact or that fact, not necessarily. They're just trying to get you to question all facts. Who's doing that? Who's propagating that? I mean, yesterday on The Gist, I talked about a study that 38% of the disinformation around coronavirus comes from President Trump. He's the literal number one purveyor of what the researchers called the infodemic. So we shouldn't be questioning, or we shouldn't be puzzled, or maybe we shouldn't even find it notable that our first instinct is to say, wow, that's crazy. And our second instinct is to say, but is it a ploy? Because he's trained us to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, absolutely. And I ran it through, I mean, first of all, the other problem with this is if you're a journalist trying to evaluate the veracity of something like this, you kind of typically will run it through some scenarios in your head, like what would be the upside, what would be the downside, but I also feel like I'm running those scenarios on behalf of a madman. Like I just don't necessarily know that he would think the way that I would think about this.
Right. And I also think that, we as people who have public outlets that we want to always have credibility, we have to weigh how much to get into, whether to even get into it. So this is why we're talking about the meta phenomenon. And I get that. But I think on my show, I'm going to at least get into the issue of what counts as ethical speculation in this context. Like, I'm glad on Twitter that maybe the same kind of people who had, the Mueller She Wrote podcast or whatever, maybe some of these empty wheel type people are going to go hard at what might be evidence that it's a ploy. I'm glad that's out there. And then both you and I guess, have to decide, okay, how to give it voice. So the fact that we're engaged in that, I think it's not only explicable, I think there might be some value to it. Like, you don't want to just pretend that it's 1995 and what the White House says is the truth or something, really close to the truth. You have to allow yourself the possibility. It's very hard to do it in the most ethical and responsible manner, though, I think.
Right. You don't want to be, those people, I forget, there are actually some pretty famous ones, who insist that Stevie Wonder isn't blind, or Vedmeta, for that matter, isn't blind. There's something unattractive about denying the validity of a medical condition. But we're not really, as we say in so many situations, when we were talking a few days ago, when it was really important 2 days ago about how to fix the debates, it would always come down to, but on the other hand, one of the three people on the stage is always going to be Donald Trump. And that means that all of the things that you would ordinarily do to fix something probably won't work. And similarly here, Donald Trump, in so many ways, is not Stevie Wonder.
Yeah. I don't know if Lucy's there, but I think that it's responsible in so many ways to, let me restart this thought, which is this. Donald Trump has destroyed the norms, and he's engaged in a project where he forces us to question everything about government and everything about the presidency and everything about taking things at first glance. In fact, not only is this a consequence of what he does, it's why he does it. He talks about the CDC and don't trust the CDC. So if we just take him by the standards he's set, that our institutions who we were once thought of as the deep state or people with their own interests, how can we not, by his own training, apply that to the White House? And as we try to dissect, what is his strategy with why he came out and interrupted Biden, or what was his strategy with why he told us to, inject bleach. There is some sort of strategy there, and good, responsible political prognosticators might be able to articulate that. Now, because health is purportedly on the line, now is exactly when we have to stop. this is the, water's edge of acceptable discourse. I want to do it responsibly, but I think right now the networks are defaulting into pretending this is any old president with a stated dire health concern. And I understand that they have to do that. I wouldn't want them to get out ahead of ourselves. But we also have to carve out something of the, let us realize who this guy is and let us pursue the possibility that all is not what meets the eye.
Right. We're still troubleshooting, Lucy. So don't feel like you're hogging the mic right now. So yeah, and then when you do game it out, when you do start thinking about it, it seems as though it would be a terrible strategy. That, yes, it's a distraction from all the stuff about his taxes and finances. Yes, it's a distraction from his very poor performance in the debate. Yes, it would give him some time to kind of lay low, regroup, see if he can make up some of the deficit that he has in the polls. Yes, it might ultimately allow him to claim he was sort of right about COVID-19, if in fact he doesn't have it right now, and then can come bounding out onto the stage, in 10 days in order to prove that. I sort of get all of that. But I think in general, and particularly now that there's a little bit of a bullet effect, and we see that Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, has it, the president of Notre Dame, who was there at the Rose Garden ceremony with to be possibly not confirmed very soon, Amy Coney Barrett. He's the president of Notre Dame, has tested positive. I mean, at this point, you're just looking around, you're thinking, well, this is horses, not zebras. The guy who didn't like to wear masks, now has the disease that masks help you not get. You don't really need to make up a zebra story to have this all make sense.
Right. And the vectors of contagion are following what we know about coronavirus, not what we know about an imagined Donald Trump's ploy, right? So like the president of Notre Dame wouldn't be in on it. It's not in his interest to halt the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, for instance. True.
Right. So, by the way, we've we used Mission Control. Ed Harris had a whole bunch of people make a whole new microphone for Lucy, and I think we're there. Lucy Gellman, can you hear me?
Hey, y'all. How are you?
And we can hear you.
So are you there?
Yes, I'm going to just because I really am sort of interested in how people experience these things in 2020. I want to go back to my original question for you. How did you get this news, and how did it land? In other words, did you hear the news in a certain way and then suddenly hear 4 or 5 other different sets of speculation about it?
I don't know if I'd say 4 or 5 other sets. So I am I'm perpetually behind on my work, and was up at 1 or 2 a.m. and did a bad thing, which is checking Facebook, and immediately saw, and then started like doomsday scrolling. And I saw kind of a couple different reactions. I will say I saw like unbridled glee that I thought was actually like kind of inappropriate. I mean, I feel like we all in this country have data breached ourselves to the point of oblivion. And so if the NSA is going to find out something, they've probably already found it out. But at the same time, I was seeing people say like really uncharitable things that maybe other folks are feeling or thinking, but not saying. So I saw that. And then almost immediately, like I would say definitely by 2 a.m., I was seeing people who I think of as generally reasonable human beings say, this is a hoax. This isn't true. Trump is just saying this and then going to come around and say, oh, it was like a bad cold or a bad flu. And the media is the media of which both Mike and I are members, is going to pivot. And it's going to be all Trump all the time. And there's going to be a huge swell of nationalism to come out of this. I saw a political scientist who I respect very much say this is just a reason for the debate next week to be canceled. And so I feel like even though, of course, we know logically that Facebook's algorithm gives you a very small sampling of people, and usually it's kind of an echo chamber, I feel like I got it all. Compounded by the fact that it was like my sleepy brain, right? And so I went to bed, and then this morning when my partner woke up, told him, and that was like it was like resetting the clock and having to go through that all over again.
Well, to Lucy's point about we've all data breached ourselves to a fairly well, Mike, that's the other reason that I think that this can't be a hoax. Not that Donald Trump ever seems to have to pay the same price that anybody else would for things that he gets caught doing. But, if you did do a hoax like this and there was anybody else, anybody who knew about it, who suddenly had second thoughts, or as people, this is a very leaky White House, both anonymously and with like former Mike Pence staffers just coming forward and spilling their guts. This would be a huge risk to assume you had a watertight conspiracy.
Yeah, I agree with you. But right now, electorally, and by his behavior in the debate, he seems like the kind of person who wants to engage in a huge and risky behavior. But I agree with you. The more that comes out about, I think this is the best argument against it being a hoax. The more that comes out about other people, other donors, other people in contact with the people he was in contact with, acquiring the virus, the less it becomes just the president making it up. The less likely it becomes.
Yeah, yes, I agree. Just the cascading dominoes here. And so, I should say that typically the no's over the course of the week when we're talking about things, people will often bring up political subjects, stuff in the news, and I always say, well, no, this is really kind of a culture episode, and I'm breaking the rule in every possible way at this point because this story just it demands so much attention. And Lucy, one of the things that and Mike in particular, I think on Twitter has been documenting this pretty well. One of the things that probably is significantly in jeopardy is not merely the October 15th debate, but in the days leading up to it, the plans to try to confirm Justice Amy Coney Barrett. It's starting to look like maybe her Saturday Rose Garden event might have been one of the initial spreader moments. Mike Lee comes away from it. The president of Notre Dame comes away from it. They test positive. She meets with Mike Lee 3 days later in his office after the event. But, here we are looking at a thing that was going to be a big part of the next couple of weeks. And you kind of wonder, like, who else is going to be sick before that even gets going?
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if there was a question in there, but yeah.
Well, I'm just interested in your reaction.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it's a time of, it already felt like there was a lot of doom and uncertainty, at least for me, around this time of year, and now there's more.
Okay, we're getting a CNN chyron that a journalist and a communications staffer through the White House also are positive right now. That's that's all we know so far. And in a way, Mike, maybe this is also the fickle finger of fate speaking. Mitch McConnell has thought for so long that he can make decisions about who gets confirmed and who doesn't, and when things happen and when they don't, and when rules and conventions are followed and when they are disregarded. And it is very possible that now that, some other larger power is going to step in and decide a lot of things that will disrupt plans.
Yeah. Although I don't know that fate only. I think we're having a selective vision when it comes to fate, right? Think of all the bad luck or what Mitch McConnell would consider good luck up until now to put him in this position. All the things that had to go right, and then the one thing goes wrong, and for him, we consider it fate. We've all become the decision desk of news headquarters, because as we speak, I'm seeing these videos of Mike Lee at the ceremony for Amy Coney Barrett, just hugging away, maskless and hugging left and right. And now we have to do a deep dive on who these people were that he hugged and who else they hugged. This is going to be some sort of forensic Twitterology, the likes of which we've never seen.
Well, I think it was in the unsanitized newsletter, I want to say this morning, so David Dayen's saying Trump is possibly the hardest human to contact trace. But I think that applies to several people in his orbit, right? And it is a little funny, Mike, but at the same time, you're like, oh, damn.
Yeah, I know. You go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know if he's come into contact with Barron in the last month. But go ahead.
All right. So actually, that's a good place maybe for us, an uplifting note on which for us to take a really quick break. We'll be back. We are going to see if we can, because we all went to the trouble of watching this particular, well, Mike had to do it anyway because he was interviewing everybody connected to it. But because we all went to the trouble of watching this thing on Showtime, we're going to see if there's a way that we can weave it into the conversation that the whole nation is having right now. All right, we are back. And with us are Lucy Gellman and Mike Pesca. I can't wait to listen to the gist tonight to hear what else Mike Pesca has to say about everything that we've been talking about. But yes, part of our mission this week, and I think in a way we were lucky. There's a way in which this somewhat outdated story of James Comey, circa 2015, 2016, 2017, has a conversation with the moment that we're in right now. And I think we can successfully explore that. But just to quickly, once again, give you a sense, this is an adaptation of Comey's memoir, A Higher Loyalty, written and directed by Billy Ray. And it stars Jeff Daniels as James Comey because he is tall, and Brendan Gleeson, for all kinds of complicated reasons, as Donald Trump. Let's hear a little clip from the first episode. You're going to hear Jeff Daniels as James Comey, and Amy Seimetz as Trisha Anderson. Before you play the clip, I want to say I'm pretty sure, Mr. McPants, that Amy Seimetz is the person who created She Dies Tomorrow, the not very gripping horror movie that we watched for a previous nose. But you can fact check me on that. Let's hear the Comey conversation.
Hillary's just been elected. A Republican-controlled House is drafting bills of impeachment before she's even sworn in. Now imagine we find something incriminating. We present those findings to House Judiciary. They ask us when we first found these emails, and we'll be obliged to say that we learned of them a month before the election. And the world will conclude that we actively concealed this from the American public in order to tip the election. Where does that leave the credibility of this institution?
Any letter that you put out at this juncture is going to be interpreted by the public to mean that we found new evidence of wrongdoing.
If I don't inform Congress on this, I should be fired, run out of town.
But boss, what if our doing this results in the election of Donald Trump as president?
That I don't remember ever having heard of Trisha Anderson, but watching this thing, I thought, wow, one of the big lessons here is more people should have listened to Trisha Anderson, whoever she was at the time, and also that Jonathan Banks should be placed in charge of some kind of major national security thing because he's got the chops for it, even as Jonathan Banks. So, Mike, I'm going to go to you first. Although I know now you're like best friends with Jeff Daniels and Billy Ray, and you're probably going socially distanced rollerblading with them this weekend. So you may be compromised at this point. But I just want to get sort of in general. Ask you, and actually, I think one thing that's really important here is really within a variance of days, how this thing affects you really can make a difference between whether you watched it a week ago, 2 days ago. I mean, there's so many things that happen that kind of alter some of the reactions we might have to this. So you watched it a while back, but tell me a little bit about just what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I watched it with a pretty firm conviction about what I thought of James Comey, which is a lot of, that doesn't mean it's black and white. My thoughts are a lot of ambivalence. And I think it was very clear that this was, as it was an adaptation of his memoir, this was the sort of movie that Comey didn't literally necessarily have to give his blessing to, but he was lightly consulted, and you know that he would have liked the portrayal. A couple of telling things that even if you don't have to watch all 4 hours to know that it's pretty much on Comey's side, but to some extent doesn't work because of that. Billy Ray, the director, told me that, as we know, James Comey's decision to disclose the investigation in days before the election, that's not what threw the election to Trump. I mean, that's not true. I'm not saying it was, but it's an overdetermined result. And there's no way you can disprove that, Comey's blurting out that he's not bringing charges didn't have a big effect, and he could have chosen not to do that. But Billy Ray at least asserted that he's blameless. Okay, so we're watching a documentary from someone, the creator of which assumes he's blameless. But the big thing is just casting Jeff Daniels. And when you do that, when you cast this guy who's in the tradition of Gregory Peck, who also played Atticus Finch, right? And someone like Jimmy Stewart, and maybe if you can't get Tom Hanks for a sympathetic role, or you need a taller, blonder Tom Hanks, you get Jeff Daniels. You're saying something, and the word that you're saying is decency, I think. Jeff Daniels just cannot play a serial killer. He always emotes decency. He always brings his past associations with him. And so when you do that, you know that you're getting a Comey who is going to be portrayed as fundamentally decent. I think Daniels did a good job, but that is the Comey we got.
All right. Although Jonathan McPants is pointing out that neither Gregory Peck nor Jimmy Stewart ever did a pooping scene like in Dumb and Dumber. So, so there are some variances here. And also, as I declared to all of you, I mean, I was so annoyed by the series The Newsroom and by the role that Daniels played that I don't quite have that set of unalloyed admiration and affection for him. But Lucy, just in general, I know that you, well, actually just give us a sense of how this landed on you. And then I think, I think will be very interesting to pivot from there to some of the depictions in this and maybe how they bump up against the present moment. But Lucy, overall, how did this go for you? Yeah.
I thought it was wretched. I really did not enjoy. I mean, part of it is any context in which I have to interface with 46-1, or like in anything in his orbit or anyone in his orbit, it is a little bit of a trauma anymore. But also the main thesis, and I think Mike touched on this, the main thesis of this is flawed, because the thesis is Comey is decent. He's a decent dude. And I disagree with that. But I didn't think it was very good. And I thought it reduced probably like one of the most cataclysmic moments, or the beginning of one of the most cataclysmic moments in my lifetime, to like Comey and mild sexism, and that's it. That was the election. Nothing else.
Well,
horrible and very reductive depictions of, not that I have great sympathy for Russia, but just very like, what, you're like clinking vodka flasks on the National Mall, and that's
those two kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern guys. Yeah. They are those are underwritten parts, even within the scope of this particular movie. I did think that, I'll just defend it a little bit and say that I initially was bored and I was feeling as though so many things have happened since then. I think I compared it to watching Citizen Kane in England in the middle of 1943. Well, this might be a pretty good movie, but it's just, I have a whole bunch of other stuff on my plate right now. But I did think, stuff like even the domestic stuff, Comey, the first people that he really has to kind of face after he's done these things, and particularly after Trump has won the election, is his wife and his 4 daughters. And, they're really mad at him and they're blaming him. And, some of that stuff I thought it kind of, it intrigued me. But I do want to talk a little bit about the depiction of Trump, the portrayal of Trump by the Irish actor Brendan Gleeson. I've long believed that the person who should play Trump at some point is, in fact, Brendan Fraser, partly because Trump has that quality of somebody who hasn't fully participated in civilization. Like, you feel like he's never had a dog, and he probably doesn't know any songs after Elvis, except the Kanye ones he's been forced to learn. And there's just sort of a sense in which he just is, he's been very involved with himself and not much else. And Brendan Fraser in 2 different movies, Encino Man and Blast from the Past, have played these people, exactly that kind of person who's been isolated from civilization and then has to learn about it kind of, in fast order. He's got a good body type too. But anyway, that's just me. I wanted to get that off my chest. But Mike, Gleeson, this is, I don't know. I'm struggling a little bit with the performance that Gleeson gave, and I'm wondering what you're thinking about it.
If we're going to cast famous cinematic cavemen, which is what you're talking about with Fraser, why not Ringo Starr, who was in Caveman? It'd be good. It'd be a good Trump is Vincent D'Onofrio, just because he's a good actor and kind of tall, and the character he played in Men in Black, who infected by the outer space bug. That is a little bit of the Trump fumbling, stumbling around. It's impossible, right? It's impossible to play Trump. What's the line between an impression and a performance? But I think there were things there that Gleason did that were a performance, that were embodying a character. And some of those weren't exactly his manner of speech, but its physicality. I just think how he used his body to intimidate, how you could also see where his attention would go or not go. So you got an inkling, or at least an insight. That's maybe what a great performance of someone we think we know so intimately could do. Give us an insight as to what this character, if he is a character, what he might be thinking. I do think, though, I didn't hate the movie, and I'll tell you why. I've read the Comey book. I interviewed the Peter Strzok, who wrote his own book. So many Washington Post stories and New York Times stories and New Yorker stories. And I just think there is a benefit to see it in a different form, in non-written form, in an acted out as if we were in the room form. And most of that, from what I know, and I think it's pretty deep, there were moments that really didn't jibe with reality. Yes, they portrayed the assignation between Lisa Page and Strzok in a way that was pretty salacious, and I thought also pretty rude to those people. They kind of trampled over their privacy while taking so many pains to portray Comey in a perfect light. But I think it had some value, but you have to be of the mindset that that's the sort of thing that might be interesting for you to see.
We're going to play a clip in just a second here, Mike, but while I'm talking to you about this, I think I'm correct about this. I did wake up this morning and I saw all this information, and I was jumping around in social media, and lorazepam hadn't worn all the way off anyway. And so I could be wrong about this, but I think you were the person who made the point that one of the reasons this whole moment that's happening right now is problematic for Trump is that his name and the word obese are going to be mentioned over and over and over again in terms of comorbidity with COVID. And one of the things that happens in this movie is you really do see him swilling down a lot of whipped cream and McDonald's products.
It is true. I made that point. But then I heard on the BBC that obesity itself is not a comorbidity. So I felt a little bad that I put it out there that it is legitimate to talk about Trump's obesity. But, CNN has talked about Trump's obesity, and the media is not going to not say Trump's obesity, and Trump and obesity and Trump are probably going to be said in a lot of ways, an obesity number of ways.
Right. Well, when the NSA goes over this tape, they're going to certainly feel that. All right. Before Lucy goes, let's just hear a little clip so people can hear a little bit what Gleason sounds like. This is the two leads, Gleason and Daniels, in their respective roles.
One thing I never had to think about in the Trump organization, because I did so much myself, people think we were so big, but truth is I did everything. But now I have to rely on people. I have all these idiot advisors around who think they got me elected. I actually listen to TV people, because they got to get ratings every day. White House advisor can guess wrong, still keep his job. Not the TV guys. A lot of smart people in that business.
Well, you can rely on me, sir, to tell you that
I need loyalty. I expect loyalty.
So, Lucy Gellman, you're listening to Gleason. Was he a credible Trump for you?
Yeah, sure. I think what Gleason gets right in this role, I hadn't thought about, who I would cast, because I would not have made this movie. But I think what Gleason gets right in this role is Trump wants to be like a bad sort of mob boss, right? And I think, and even this is a little inside baseball, but in the movie, the Gleason, as portraying Trump, says, Alec Baldwin comes on TV and he makes me look like a buffoon. And this was not a parody. This was, I think Gleason really was acting. And I think what he gets right is the mannerisms and the sort of the attempt at intimidation, which is sort of a buffoon-esque attempt at intimidation. But Trump really wants to be this mob boss, I think, and I see that coming across in the movie.
I will say, just to complete that quote that you cited, he says that Alec Baldwin makes it look like he can't read, and then he says, "Who does he think wrote all my bestsellers?" And we all know who we think wrote his bestsellers, and it's not him. It's just such. It's sort of why he says, "I'm tested positive for COVID," and half the country goes, "Yeah, well, maybe you didn't," because and there are moments here that are. I said, your reaction can be conditioned by a difference in days of when you watch it. So watching it after the Times tax revelations, there's a moment where we see Trump, and this is just public record stuff, but he at one point says, he said, no dealings with Russia. He goes, mainly because I don't want any debt. I don't think debt's good. Debt wouldn't be good for me. And well, I mean, we know he's got $420 million of debt. So, just watching those things and kind of knowing the truth is interesting. I do want to just pivot a little bit away from this and say, so Judd Apatow today tweeted, well, we'll find out tonight where the humor line is about this. I assume he's just talking about any late night programs that are live on Fridays. But we're also heading into Saturday night, where Saturday Night Live is going to kind of unveil their new look, and they're back in the studios to a certain degree, I guess. And we're going to see, among other things, Jim Carrey as Joe Biden. But so maybe before we get to that, Mike, I thought Apatow raised an interesting question, which is, we talked at the beginning about how it doesn't seem particularly decorous to have any kind of public schadenfreude about Donald and Melania. But can you get laughs out of it?
I predict that the fault line for laughs will be the contrasting with past statements that paint Trump in a ridiculous light. I mean, that's not that bold a prediction. I predict Stephen Colbert will say something possibly. No, I think he'll say something sincerely. And I think depending on how you look at Stephen Colbert, you'll either take it as sincere or not. I think Kimmel will do the same, say something sincerely about, anyone having this disease doesn't deserve it. And then it will be game on in terms of all the things that Trump has ever said to deny the existence and virulence of COVID.
Right. We're back to the statistic that you cited at the beginning that, 37.8% of the wrong information about this has come directly from Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah. And Trump's passed 20,000 lies. I just checked. It's 20,000.
Okay. So, yeah, Lucy, how about you? I mean, where do you think the kind of humor line is here?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Mike. I think people are going to tread lightly or maybe a little bit lightly, not specifically because of the position that the president is in, but because this is a deadly virus, right? But at the same time, I think humor is one of our greatest, I don't want to say coping mechanisms, but sort of one of our greatest tools. And so I'm hoping to see things that are really smart and really snappy. Yeah, I mean, I would mostly agree with Mike that it's going to be some heartfelt statement, and then maybe the line will be crossed, maybe it won't be. I don't know.
I think I have this source right, but I believe it's in the Eddie Murphy episode of Comedians Riding in Cars, or whatever the Seinfeld thing is called, where I think Seinfeld says to Murphy, we think everything is funny. We think everything is potentially funny. There's nothing really that strikes us, those of us who do comedy, as off limits. It's more a question of what the market will bear, how much people are willing to put up with. But in terms of what we think, I mean, and I think that's probably true. The people creating comedy, they don't have any compunctions about this. The compunctions that they have come from third-party sources there. So I do want to just talk a little bit about the idea of Jim Carrey playing the role of Joe Biden. We've actually already seen Jason Sudeikis and somebody who I really unexpectely enjoyed in this role. I thought Woody Harrelson was going to.
He was so good.
I like Woody Harrelson as Joe Biden. But so Lucy, you have the floor here. The other person in my house who has some background in political consulting, when she heard that, she goes, "That's bad for Biden. It's bad that they picked Carrey." What's your thought?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I remember watching Harrelson do Biden, and it was either the first or second time, and I watched it with my younger brother, and we were howling. We were just like laughing so hard. And I just, for me, no one has sort of hit that same mark. And I don't think Carrey is going to do a great job. Frankly, I think Maya Rudolph is going to be fantastic as Kamala.
Well, we already know. We've seen that.
Right, we know that, right? But she will continue to be. I just think she she could be playing like a stick on a tree, and she would do a really good job. But yeah, I don't have high hopes for Carrie.
I saw her do a stick on a tree. It was a Beckett revival, and she was really good.
Yeah.
But although, well, actually, before we get to Carrie, Mike, I absolutely share Lucy's unbounded admiration for Maya Rudolph doing pretty much anything. Although there is kind of a shift here on the ground, right? So the last time she did Kamala Harris was this kind of opportunistic sort of soi-disant hip aunt, the aunt who will give you some pot and then get you busted for it, or whatever her joke was. But there was a little bit more room, I think, to elbow Kamala Harris in the writing and in the performing than maybe there is right now.
Yeah, that's true. Although I don't think when Saturday Night Live decides that these are the 2 or 3 traits that we're going to exaggerate, unless the candidate really himself or herself shows different traits or traits that we hadn't thought of, I find that Saturday Night Live doesn't shift based on the whims of the or the desires of the public, or even their own politics, right? So I think usually, because they're primarily going for humor, not to make a point. Their humor is definitely bounded by what they think. It's clear that the writing staff is not going home and watching Fox News or subscribing to QAnon theories, right? We know where they're coming from, but also how they define the humor. Here are 2 or 3 of the personality traits, and I think those personality traits are still on display with Harris, even though the stakes are different. I do have to say, it's one of those things where Kamala Harris, Maya Rudolph as Kamala Harris is great, and of course Tina Fey as Sarah Palin was great. So there are these exceptions, but I don't like the trend of always having to stunt cast and go away from the actual cast, which is a large burgeoning cast. Give Alex Moffat the chance, or give Mikey Day. Why can't Mikey Day play? I don't even know if he's back this year, but he's good. Why can't he play Joe Biden? See what you got. There's nothing about Jim Carrey, other than the fact that his name Jim Carrey, that screams Joe Biden to me, just as there is nothing about Michael Cohen that demanded that Ben Stiller played him. You could have cast that from the cast.
No, I agree. And actually, to this day, I miss Jay Farrow, several of Jay Farrow's impersonations, and especially his Ben Carson. Nobody will ever be Ben Carson to me, the way he would kind of wind his hands together in this strange little manner. I really liked a lot. But, I think with Carrie, probably the worry is that Carrie does things so broadly. First of all, I should point out, we have a Papulian through line. We were doing Jeff Daniels. Now we're doing Jim Carrey. So we've got parts of Dumb and Dumber. But Mike, there's a way in which Carrie, he will probably go after Biden in a fairly broad way that may not redound to Biden's credit.
Yes. Although I'm trying to think other than the statements and trying to get the voice right, I don't know exactly what the things are about Biden that you jump on and exaggerate. There are a few, there are catchphrases, but can anyone do it? Can anyone say, here's the deal, and put in some sort of contact lenses that make the eyes look, a little washed out? I don't know why we need Carrie to do that.
Yeah, probably not. And to your earlier point, by the way, those of you who have read Al Franken's Giant of the Senate book, he talks a lot about how the politics of political humor in Saturday Night Live go, and they are very centrist. I think he sort of says Jim Downey, who's sort of the author of an awful lot of this stuff, is very uncomfortable with there being a particular political point of view or an enforced liberal slant or something like that. So yes, yes to all that. We need a break, I'm being told, and we're going to, on the other side of this, make some recommendations to you. So let's do that. Lucy and Mike will be right back.
Love you, James Comey. I've got nothing else to say. I've got a bad head cold that just won't go away. So love you, James Comey. Just seriously love you.
All right, we are back. I have to thank Kat Pastor. She's there in the studio making everything work and making it possible for me to not be in the studio. Also, not in the studio, thanks to Kat Pastor, is Jonathan McPants, who is the producer of this episode. We will be back next week with a whole raft of shows, but the schedule's all complicated and I forget how it goes. Maybe somebody may slack me that information before the show's over. But yeah, let's make some recommendations here. Lucy Gellman, would you like to go first?
Yeah, that'd be great. So I have two quick recommendations. The first is an oldie but a goodie from the poet Ross Gay. It's called The Book of Delights, and it's not actually a book of poetry, although he has several of those. It is literally a book of delights. He wrote one delight every day for, I think, a year, and it's kind of what the world needs right now, maybe. And then the other is from No's regular Brian Slattery and his band, the Moonshells. They have released a new album called House of Air. It's available on Bandcamp if you look for the Moonshells. And it's a really, really good album. So I recommend both of those things.
Well recommended. Mike Pesca, how about you?
I'll give you a shotgun blast of a bunch of recommendations. On Netflix, there is a series that kind of disappeared a little bit. It is called Love on the Spectrum. It is about Australian kids, teenagers, maybe even early 30s, trying to date. They are on the spectrum of different, the spectrum is a spectrum. They have different degrees of either autism or Asperger's. It's delightful, and it's a tonic against if you hate regular dating shows. But now let me get to podcasts. I'll talk about two big categories. I love listening to conservative podcasts when they're rational, and there are a few more than there used to be. I'll rank them in order. Coming in fourth, The Dispatch. They often have too many. This was the one started by some former Weekly Standard people, and Jonah Goldberg is a big voice behind it. Also David French. Their podcast is good, but they have too many people talking. 4 is too many. The second best podcast among conservatives, they're not really conservatives, is The Bulwark. Charlie Sykes, just an excellent radio host. He used to be conservative. Now I would say he's centrist. And the best conservative podcast for real conservatism is still the Editors Roundtable National Review. You might not agree with them, and I often don't, but especially Charlie Cook is an eloquent guy. And the non-conservative podcast I'd recommend is Fiasco. It's Leon Neyfak's podcast. It's only on Luminary. The series this year is about the Boston school integration. It's the best. It's behind that paywall at Luminary, but he is a master. I love that podcast.
Yeah, Neyfak is terrific. You'll get no argument from me about that. So I'm going to just mention if you wind up watching the Comey Rule and then finding yourself enjoying Brendan Gleeson, although in this house we think he actually may have had to redub his lines just to get Trump's mouth movements right. It seems as though he might have had to go back into the studio and redo the lines. But I would recommend The Guard, which is a movie from a few years back that he does with Don Cheadle and a bunch of other people, and it's funny and it's exciting and it's just a great weekend thing. And I'm being told I should say that it may be racially triggering. Yeah, I guess it probably might be. I don't even know if you could do that movie, make that as a new movie now. But for all of that, watch The Guard. I'll also quickly shout out Parkville Market. I'm really late to the party here, but we now have our own kind of Chelsea Market style thing here in Hartford, and it's restaurants, and they have just terrific food, and you can get all kinds of takeout, and it's just wonderful. And I want to mention two great moments that I liked a lot anyway in the Comey Rule. One of them is Jay Johnson's character, who says to Comey, Trump can take a beating, but he can't take a punch, and then explains what he means by that. I thought that was a really fascinating observation. And just Holly Hunter as Sally Yates. I don't think that's anything like what Sally Yates is like, but she's really, really funny. And her line when she comes back the day after the election, pretending that she thinks that Hillary has won, is just a terrific comic moment in a mostly not very comic series. Hey, listen to The Gist when it drops tonight. Listen to all the other gists from this week. From Mike Pesca, so great to have you here. So great to have Lucy Gellman, too. What an all-star lineup. And yeah, we'll be back next week.
Vernon, I already said that one. Avon, Farmington, yeah.